Every time you find yourself here, it's because you chose to come back.
So I've seen Severance Season 1 1,488 times now, and after much thought and analysis, I can confidently say I deem this to be a genius, subtly dystopian masterpiece of a series. In this video, I want to go over my thoughts, theories, things I picked up on, imagery, and symbolism within the show. But most importantly, I want to hear from all of you. What did you guys think of the show? What are some things I missed? And what are your predictions and theories for the future of Severance? Also, I'm going to be uploading a lot more frequently on this channel, so it would mean the world if you guys would like, subscribe, and share the video. Even if you guys just comment to tell me how bad this video is, I'll still appreciate it. Obviously, if you haven't seen Severance yet, first off, go watch it immediately. And secondly, that serves as your spoiler warning. The show opens with the line, "Who are you?" even before the opening frame of Helly laying on the coffin-resembling table, which really outlines one of the primary themes of the entire show, self-discovery and finding one's true meaning. The opening frame not only gives us our first clue that Helly is more than just a new Lumen employee, as the voice repeatedly asks her, "Who are you?" signifying extra importance to her character, but it also provides us our first bit of biblical imagery as Helly, her name being one letter off of hell, wakes up underground on a coffin-shaped table. I've also seen many referring to this shot as a resemblance of a womb, which is very fitting considering that this is essentially the birthplace of new people when their Innie wakes up, such as Helly are. We later find that voice to be Mark Scout, who is introduced to us in an antagonist vein as he appears from the shadows of the neighboring room, frightening Helly, which is truly a unique way of introducing the audience to our actual protagonist of the show. When first introduced to Cobell, she says to Mark, "You look awful, you look hungover." In reality, Mark looks this way every day and is not noticeably hungover here, but rather this is a nod to the fact that Cobell is well aware of Mark's outie's drinking problem and potentially had an interaction with him the night before, possibly smelling like a distillery, as his sister later alludes to in the series. A subtle hint here that Cobell is more than meets the eye and is familiar with Mark's outie. In the final moment of this first episode, when it is revealed that Miss Cobell is doubling as Mrs. Selvig, which is ironic on its own because although not severed, Cobell essentially has an Innie and an outie version of herself. Anyways, in the final scene of this episode, when it is revealed that she's living next to Mark, she says, "You're good people, Mark," which can be seen sort of as a strange thing to say, but is actually a nod to the fact that Cobell knows multiple versions of Mark, and thus refers to him as people, suggesting his Innie and outie are both good people. Cobell then conducts a meeting with the board, which gives us a look at all the outdated technology that Lumen is using, despite being so technologically advanced to the point they can split memories within one's brain. My theory is that this is to prevent competitors, such as the one mentioned in the accompanying book, Dorner Therapeutics, from hacking into Lumen Industries and stealing information. Yes, Apple Books released a book titled Severance, the Lexington Letter, which gives us more information regarding Lumen. Let me know down below if you'd like a video on that. We're also introduced to Irving, who is often caught dozing, in which he visualizes heaps of black paint beginning to cover the office. This, of course, is because of his outie's obsession with painting the elevator that goes down to the testing floor, which strangely enough you can buy this painting on Etsy for $200. There's a neat shot of Irving being puzzled as to why he has black paint under his fingernails earlier in the show, and of course this is why. It's also interesting to note that Irving's Innie and outie versions of himself both have a passion for painting. What's interesting about this though, is that this dozing only happens when Irv is extremely tired. At that point, the bridge between the Innie's and outie's brain becomes foggy, and there seems to be a connection there. Perhaps sleeping bypasses the chip at that level of consciousness, and that is why sleeping at work is so frowned upon by Lumen. Furthermore, when employees become exhausted in the break room from reciting their apologies hundreds of times, they begin to hear things in their mind. Helly mentions to the team that she heard voices, which was an old man grumbling. And then Dylan says, "Oh, the crying baby." I think they were each beginning to doze and could hear things from their outie. Dylan perhaps heard one of his children crying, and the old man that Helly heard may have been her father, James Egan. Irv's dog is named Radar, which is a nod to when Miss Casey reveals that Irv's outie loves the sound of radar. Of course, this is to get a reaction out of Irv's Innie to test if the chips are working adequately. More on that in a minute. Back to Helly though. There are many references to Hell and Helly despising her time on the severed floor of Lumen. However, what is fascinating about her character is that her true self is her Innie, whereas her outie is a corporate employee that is steered by her father and born into a life she did not choose. It is completely opposite of what is generally true, in that one's work persona is often being the Innie, meaning a more sheltered and rule-abiding person when at work. Instead, it is Helly's outie that is being manipulated by the pressures of Lumen and the legacy of her family. A neat philosophical look at how people are different at work, but yet the opposite is true for Helly. Another element of her character that I love is the subtle hints that her outie thought she could steer and control her Innie. Her outie thought that essentially creating this new consciousness of herself was going to be an easy task, and that her corporate mentality felt as if this was just another part of the job. Like, for example, Helly is always wearing darker colors like blue and green, with neutral shoes the entire show until her attempted suicide. She then comes to work every day wearing bright yellow in an attempt to perk up her Innie. It's an amazing detail demonstrating that corporate-minded Helena thought she could so easily manipulate this essentially new person in Helly. Of course, we see that Helly rebels against Lumen, and nothing quite goes the way Helena presumed it would. I mentioned the colors blue and green, in which Helly wears daily prior to attempted suicide. These colors symbolize duality within the show throughout the entire season. First, representing the conflict of MDR versus optics and design, MDR having blue cards and the O&D department having green, or the earrings Helly is wearing during the finale, symbolizing her two different personas colliding. The earrings that were in fact the colors that she apparently loved as a kid, when her father reminds her that she loved the blue and green colors of the Severance chip prototype when she was a little girl. Another aspect when color was used exceptionally well was when symbolizing Mark's awakening regarding the dangers of Lumen. Mark and his colleagues eventually had to decide if they wanted to continue mindlessly working for Lumen or question the morality of being severed. Mark and Dylan were both radicalized by Rickon's ridiculous self-help book, whose bright red cover stood out in the dull office and represented an epiphany regarding their devotion to their corporation. The change in perspective about Lumen was heavily symbolized in the transition from blue to red in the MDR department. It started with Petey's blue and red striped bathrobe in episode 2 that illustrated his reintegration when his severance was reversed. Mark also began switching from blue neckties to maroon ones when he became suspicious of the company. And Dylan followed suit after discovering that his outie has a child that he can't remember. Dylan's change of heart was the most blatant since he was the only one to be woken up outside the office. He thought of nothing but his son during episode 7's musical dance experience, my favorite episode, and the flashing blue and red lights were a clear representation of his inner turmoil as a severed staff member. Just as Dylan reached his breaking point, the lights turned completely red and he instinctively attacked Milchick. Severance is so detail-oriented all the way through, and there are always new things to be found. Take for example the fish in Mark's home, also dueling colors, one being blue and the other being red, which may be a nod to the Matrix in the sense that the blue fish can be interpreted as representing Innie Mark, who knows nothing about the outside world, while the red fish represents outie Mark and his knowledge of the world beyond Lumen. Much like the red and blue pills signify in the Matrix films, where blue represents ignorantly following the system and red represents learning the truth about the real world. These fish Mark have are beta fish, in which two of them, if they are both male, cannot live together despite being the same fish. That is why Mark has a divider in the tank, and this is symbolizing Mark's Innie and outie versions of himself being unable to truly coexist. This idea occurs plenty of times within the show, such as shots of the elevator dividing Helly's head into two symmetrical halves, or various shots where one light bulb is on and the other is not, signifying that only one half has consciousness, at least at the moment. Also, check out this cool shot of dueling colors with the cars being separated by a neutral line, or this cool shot of the stacks of paper being all colorful and important, or this cool shot just cuz. Miss Casey, or who we later find to be Gemma Scout, dinosaur smuggler, and also Mark's wife, plays a very interesting role within the series. To start, her wellness checks are indeed wellness checks, but not for the employees at Lumen, but rather for the chips within their brains. The wellness checks serve as a test to see if the chips are working, and that there is no crossover of memory between one's Innie and one's outie. That is why it is so important to monitor their responses to each fact about their outie, and why Cobell placed Gemma's candle inside the session with Mark. She wanted to see if they were beginning to remember each other. In this scene, Mark also sculpts a tree out of clay, which is supposedly what Gemma had crashed into and ultimately killed her, until we find out that she is a severed employee who seemingly never gets to leave Lumen. So how does Innie Mark have the thought to create this tree out of the clay? Does love transcend severance? Miss Casey did mention that the 8 hours spent with Mark were her favorite hours of the few she has actually been awake for. This idea of there being permanent residents of Lumen who never get to leave is something that Petey warned Mark about, and even added a spot on his map dedicated to pointing this out. There are many moments within the show foreshadowing that Gemma is indeed Mark's wife, yet they are nearly impossible to spot upon first viewing. These include the strangely long stare down when passing each other in the hallway to the break room, or the scene in which Miss Cobell says to Mark's sister, "When my husband passed, I used to see him everywhere. Does Mark ever think he sees her?" which then holds for dramatic effect. Or the amazing detail when Mark is taping her photo just before the big reveal, when he mentions facts about her in the same manner as a wellness session, stating she is allergic to nutmeg. And that when she subscribes on YouTube, it's to this channel. Just how Miss Casey would speak during her sessions. Another interesting element of the show is the dichotomy between some characters' innies and outies. Like I mentioned earlier, Helly's innie despised the company the most, despite her outie having a connection to the company, whereas Irving abided by every outrageous rule within the handbook and cherished the Egan's history. Meanwhile, his outie was trying to unravel the mystery of Lumen and potentially rebel against the company. This brings me to my next theory as to how Irving's outie has compiled all of this confidential information regarding the severed floor of Lumen. There's a line early in the show where Petey says to Mark, "I'm your best friend, and you are my really good friend." This, combined with the fact that Irving is the one who has been at Lumen, at least in the MDR department, the longest, I think it is safe to say Petey has been there for quite some time too, considering he was the department chief prior to Mark stepping into that role. This may signify that they had become really close. So why did Petey go to Mark for help and not Irv? My guess is that Petey has been trying to get the help from Irv, and that is how he has all of that Lumen information in his house. Yet Petey was also very aware that Irv's innie cherishes Lumen above all, and trying to take down the company from the inside may be a job better suited for Mark. Alright, this leads me to one of my next biggest theories, which regards Miss Cobell, specifically her actually being one of the good guys and specifically rebelling against Lumen. But first, a quick word from the sponsor of this video. It's this painting from Etsy. Okay, back to the video. So if you look closely at the altar within the home of Harmony Cobell that she has on display, it features the last name Cobell as well as a birth date from the 40s. This leads me to surmise the altar is for that of her recent mother, whom I theorize was killed due to a faulty air tube created by Lumen. The tube is also present here on the altar. It is mentioned throughout the show that Lumen Industries may be a manufacturer of medical equipment, as well as hints of this in the canonical Apple book. I assume it was a Lumen error that has caused the death of Harmony's mother, and thus she is working up the ranks of the company with the plans to tear it down from the top. A couple more hints that lead to this is the fact that she often breaks Lumen protocol, which demonstrates she is not loyal to the company, as well as the scene within the finale episode when Helly says to her, "I'm going to destroy your company," to which Harmony is disgusted by the comment, replying, "My company?" Being offended that one would think this is her company, and also disdained by the fact that the comment is coming from an Egan, the family that may be responsible for her mother's death. This would also explain Harmony's overreaction to being fired by Lumen. She has spent so much time working her way up in the company to fulfill her master plan, and it had gotten taken away from her in that moment. However, I say this being aware that she may have deeper intrinsic motivations as well. Take her obsession with Mark, for example, and more specifically, her obsession with whether or not Mark and Gemma remember each other, or her obsession with Petey's reintegration. It seems she's curious to know if the chips are truly permanent, or if she can find a way to bypass or reverse their effects. Maybe she has family members that are severed and she wants to find a way to fix this. Maybe she is related to Gemma, and hence her obsession with Mark. I know, it's a stretch. I think this is why Cobell chooses Lumen, despite being fired during the finale of the show. She calls Milchick to warn him of what's going on and attempts to save the gala from being ruined by Helly's speech. I think her motivation here isn't to save Lumen, but is to get her job back at Lumen. This way she could find a way to keep this rebellious crew employed and finally see her master plan come to fruition of taking down this twisted organization. Guys, I could go on forever on the brilliance of this show, including the cinematography, the score, even the episode titles, as well as even more deep questions the show poses, such as consciousness and bringing people into the world without their choice. I also am left with some huge questions for Season 2, which just started shooting by the way, with 8 new cast members. Look out for a video on that right here on my channel. I can't figure out why every single vehicle seen within the show is an old car, despite the series taking place in 2020 and having super advanced tech. Or who do we think the board is going to be that is always on the end of the line with Natalie? Guys, so many questions and I'm dying to hear from all of you. What are things I missed? What are your craziest theories? What were your overall feelings on the show? I'm hoping we can start a discussion series on the brilliance of Severance, and keep it locked right here for all the news regarding Season 2, as well as future theory videos.